They never thought she had a chance. Not the judges in their crisp tweed coats, not the crowd clutching silk leashes and parading pedigrees like jewelry, and certainly not Malcolm de Vere, the revered, razor-eyed judge who famously once said, "A champion is bred, not found." But there, in the spotlight of the competition ring, stood Evelyn Rhodes, posture upright, one hand gently placed on the head of a poised and vigilant Belgian Malinois named Knight. At 60, Evelyn didn't fit the image of a typical competitor. She looked more like a woman who had wandered in from another life, one of survival, solitude, and silent battles. No one in that arena knew what it had taken to bring her there. No one except a little girl named Elara and the dog who had quite literally saved them both. This wasn't a story about trophies. It was about trust, redemption, and the kind of bond forged in fire and carried through ashes. Long before she entered that ring, Evelyn had been fighting a different kind of war. For over 2 decades, she'd served as a frontline medic in the Air Force, tending to wounded comrades under mortar fire, beneath collapsing buildings, and in the dead silence between explosions. She had seen more pain than most could imagine, and she carried it with her. In the tightness of her jaw, in the way her eyes darted at sudden noise, in the invisible weight that bowed her shoulders when she thought no one was looking. At 54, honorably discharged, she returned to her childhood town of Maple Hollow, tucked between mountain ridges and forested quiet. But peace was not waiting for her. Instead, she found a kind of silence that roared too loud. Her sleep became a battlefield of its own. Sirens in her dreams. Blood in her memory. Every sudden noise brought her back to places she never wanted to revisit. She avoided markets, parks, anything crowded. It was during one of her long, restless drives along the rural backroads that she saw him. A mud-covered Malinois with a limp, lying motionless by a ditch swollen from rain. Ribs showing, coat tangled with burrs, but eyes alert. He didn't bark. He didn't back away. He just watched. Something in his gaze told her he had survived his own war. She didn't ask where he came from. She simply opened her truck door and said, "Come on, soldier. Not today." And he climbed in. She called him Knight. What she didn't know then was that the battered dog would become her anchor, her first step back from the edge. For weeks, it was just the two of them. No words were needed. His stillness spoke volumes, her silence felt safe in his company. They healed in parallel, two souls broken in different ways, finding rhythm in their routine. Then, Elara arrived. 10 years old, suitcase dragging behind her like a burden, eyes dull with recent loss. Her mother, Evelyn's daughter, had passed unexpectedly. With no one else to take her, she came to live with a grandmother she barely remembered and a dog she'd never met. But grief recognizes grief. She curled up beside Knight that first night like she'd always known him. He didn't move, just pressed his flank into her side like a fortress. Elara began drawing again, silent at first, but expressive on paper. Knight featured in nearly every sketch. Sometimes Evelyn did too, though always with her back turned. One night, after Evelyn jolted awake from another nightmare, drenched in sweat, she found Elara standing in the doorway, holding her sketchpad. "You were crying," she whispered. "I heard you." Evelyn tried to say it was nothing, but Elara opened her pad to a drawing. Knight and Evelyn curled together on the kitchen floor, Evelyn's arms wrapped around the dog like he was the only thing anchoring her to earth. From that moment, healing stopped being a lonely endeavor. They began doing it together. One evening, while sorting through an old box, Elara found an outdated canine training guide. That same night, she watched a video about therapy dogs helping veterans with PTSD. Maybe Knight could be like that, she said softly. And so they began. Not for shows, not yet, for sanity. For structure. Evelyn and Elara started taking Knight through simple exercises. Sit. Stay. Walk in rhythm. Not perfection, presence. Elara cheered each small win, her eyes slowly gaining back their light. Evelyn wasn't just functioning again. She was living. It was Elara who planted the next seed. "There's a local dog competition next month," she said one evening as they watched fireflies from the porch. "I think Knight could win." Evelyn laughed. "He ignores me half the time." "But he listens when it counts," Elara said. "And it's not just about winning. It's about showing what he is. What you are." The thought of a noisy arena, flashing lights, crowds, brought back a storm of panic. But Evelyn looked at Elara and saw something stronger than fear. Hope. Let's try, she said. Training picked up. Elara acted as coach, timing drills and celebrating progress with joyful squeals. Night thrived on the attention. Evelyn found herself breathing more easily. Laughing. Eating. Trusting. On competition day, the arena teemed with noise, chatter, barking. Evelyn's hands trembled, but Night was steady. And when their names were called, they entered the ring like warriors, not flashy, but sure. Command after command, Night moved with sharp focus, responding not just to voice but to presence. Evelyn held her ground. When the final scores were posted, they had won first place. Elara screamed with joy. Evelyn cried. Not for the medal, but for what it meant. She had stepped into the light, and survived. But joy was short-lived. 2 days later, Night was gone. No barking. No broken fence. Just an open door. And a leash still hanging on its hook. Evelyn's heart raced as she called his name. No answer. Elara's face crumpled the moment their eyes met. They searched. Posters. Shelters. Social media. Silence. Evelyn spiraled. The PTSD came roaring back. She collapsed one afternoon in the kitchen, gasping for air. Elara found her, knelt beside her. Don't disappear again, she begged. Night wouldn't want that. Those words cut through the fog. Evelyn stood, trembling, but resolute. Night hadn't run. He was taken. And she had a suspicion. Malcolm de Vere. He hadn't applauded their win. Had barely reacted. He had watched, too intently. Calculating. Cold. She called the police. I believe my dog was stolen. And I think I know who did it. Detective Lang listened. We've heard de Vere's name before. Wealthy. Influential. But slippery. They dug in. Surveillance footage showed his SUV leaving a property on the edge of town, one registered to an old breeding operation. There were scratch marks, blood, traces of fur, but no dog. Night didn't make it easy, Lang said. Dogs like him? They don't break easy. Then came the breakthrough, a vet clinic outside town. A Malinois brought in by a man claiming he found it limping. Evelyn and Lang drove out at dawn. The receptionist whispered, in the back. There, behind a steel gate, was Night. Bruised. Bandaged. But alive. When he saw Evelyn, he tried to stand, tail thudding. She dropped to her knees, arms open. He collapsed into her, breath shaky, but safe. I'm so sorry, she whispered into his fur. He had never blamed her. Back home, when Night stepped out of the truck, Elara ran to him, sobbing. He licked her face with joy. Evelyn watched them both, overwhelmed. She had almost let the darkness win again. But not this time. The following days were gentler. Nightmares came, but Evelyn had Night. When people stopped her in town, it wasn't with pity, it was with pride. You're the one with the dog, they'd say. You're the brave one. She didn't feel brave. But she felt alive. One afternoon, Elara tied a yellow ribbon from her mother's old scarf around Night's collar. It fluttered in the wind as they stood on the hill behind the house, watching clouds drift. I thought my story ended after the war, Evelyn whispered. She looked at Night. At Elara. Maybe this is where it really begins. She didn't need applause. She didn't need a title. What they had was more than healing. It was rebirth. So Evelyn built something new. A training circle behind the house. A safe place for forgotten dogs and wounded veterans. A place for those learning to live again. And every day, Evelyn walked a little taller. Spoke a little stronger. Because healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about writing something better in its place. Your story isn't over, it's just waiting to begin. In every chapter of Evelyn, Elara, and Night's journey, we find the heartbeat of something universal. The courage to keep going, even when the world goes quiet. Their story reminds us that healing isn't neat, and bravery doesn't always roar. Sometimes it shows up in trembling hands, in whispered promises, in choosing love after loss. If you've ever felt broken, unseen, or silenced by your past, know this. You are not alone. Your pain does not disqualify you. You still have something beautiful to build. Let this story be your reminder that scars don't end the story. They mark the place where your next chapter begins. Share this story with someone who needs hope. Support rescue animals or veterans healing programs in your community. Tell your story, even if your voice shakes. Especially if it does. Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting to hear it, and begin again, too.